Hey, if you enjoyed this video or my content in general, don't forget to subscribe to keep up with new uploads. It helps out a lot, thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. How's it going? My name's Ethan and welcome to a brand new video. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Hope the wait wasn't too long. This video is intended to release on Halloween but got pushed back due to some extenuating circumstances. Nonetheless, the stuff that I played here is still really good and I still want to talk about it. Today we'll be getting a little spooky and talking about some indie horror games that I found over the course of October. I've never been a big horror game guy. I've played a handful like Outlast and Dead by Daylight, but it's not really a genre I've explored. Despite this, I set out on a search for some good independent horror experiences that I could talk about, and I think I found a solid little selection. However, before we get too far into the video, let me go ahead and say that if you enjoy this video, don't forget to leave a like, as it helps me out a ton in the algorithm. If you want more from me regularly, you can check out my Twitter at Eithan Tweets. I post progress updates on new videos, life, and just some general shit posting. If you want to support me and the channel financially, you can check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Ethan. I got a few tiers where you can gain access to a Discord server, behind the scenes content like notes and scripts, and have your name appear or shouted out at the end of videos. If any of that interests you, the links to both my Twitter and Patreon are in the description. I also post questions and polls on my community tab from time to time, so keep an eye out on those. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into it. When I decided I wanted to make this video, I set out on my search looking for games that had a good atmosphere and good storytelling. We've gotten enough of this jump scare schlock over the years with games like FNAF and Hello Neighbor. I wanted something that unsettled me conceptually. A jump scare may get a quick jolt out of you, but the kind of horror I find most effective towards me is when the concept itself leaves you unsettled. It leaves you with this sense in your mind that the world itself is off. That kind of stuff lasts a lot longer with me than a funny jump scare, so I wanted some games with a crafted, unsettling atmosphere and interesting, meaningful storytelling, and the selection of games I found hit that nail on the head in my opinion. I'll leave a link to a list of all the games I'm going to show off in this video if you want to go play them. They're all free except for one of them, and that one's only $1. So without further ado, here's some of the indie horror games I played during Halloween. Okay, let's start off by, let's go with the Man? What the hell is... What the fuck? On to our first real entry, let's talk about the shortest entry in the list, Start Survey. Start Survey is a free-to-play short horror game where you place someone sitting in their room in front of their computer. The entire room is in black and white, and the computer in the game prompts you to start the survey. The survey starts by asking you personal questions about your beliefs, environment, and emotions before delving into more philosophical questions about the nature of existence itself. There isn't too much in gameplay here. Start Survey is much more of an experience than a video game. You answer questions on a computer screen and sometimes interact with your environment. There's a few jump scares throughout the game, but the primary focus of the game is the story unfolding through the survey. The game only takes like 5 to 7 minutes to complete, so I'd say go play it if you really care, but spoilers for the ending and one of the mechanics in the game ahead, so skip to the next chapter. The game starts off innocuously by asking some easy questions like, are you having a good day? Have you cleaned off your desk recently? Do you believe in a god? Before hitting you with a few jump scares and some more intense questioning. The survey asks you if you would be scared if the lights went out before shutting the lights off in-game and you hear the door creak open. The game then starts asking you if you're alone and if anybody would know if you went missing. Then it hits you with the, do you know the man standing behind you? Maybe I'm just paranoid, but every time I got asked this question, I'd have to check behind me in person before doing so in-game. Probably didn't help that I was playing it at like 4 in the morning. Then they hit you with another jump scare when you turn back to the desk of a guy standing behind your desk. Those are really the only two jump scares in the game, so it's not the primary source of the scares. The game then shifts, asking you if your emotions are real and if you're sure reality is what it seems. You're then asked if you'd be shocked if you found out reality was fake and if you want to know the truth. The game then disassembles your environment and the house you're in and tells you that you're in a simulation. Everything has been artificially crafted, but the surveyor can show you the truth and set you free. And that's it. Once the surveyor tells you he can set you free, the game just closes and you're done. The game also hits you with some meta fourth wall breaking by calling you by your computer username and pulling files from your desktop into the game. That's always a nice little fun touch to see implemented in games. And that's it. Start Survey is just a quick and interesting experience that poses some thoughtful and philosophical questions about the nature of reality with a generally spooky tone. If you have 10 minutes and want something to ponder, I'd recommend it. For the next game on the list, I wanted to find some sort of backrooms or liminal space themed game, since those concepts are really interesting to me. While I don't hate the idea, I'm not particularly a fan of the escape from monsters in the backrooms type games. I wanted a game that focused on the liminal aspect. And for that, Liminal Memory offered up a unique take on the concept of liminal spaces and put a story to it. Liminal Memory is a walking sim that has you play as someone in their old age, reminiscing over their foggy memories through a scrapbook and exploring several liminal spaces. There is a story throughout it depending on what route you take. The game has 3 different routes that drastically change the ending, but I'm not going to spoil any of that here. There isn't much gameplay here, a reoccurring theme with all the games on this list, but the atmosphere really sells this game. The game is in the PSX style, which for those who don't know, emulates the polygonal modeling and haze of PS1 games. This style adds to the idea of this being an old memory. You're able to remember the vague shapes of things and the events that occurred, but the fine details are fuzzy and hard to remember. With this, the levels are covered in a hazy fog with this VHS overlay to emphasize how these memories are fading from the mind of the protagonist. To top off this idea of a degrading memory, the entire game's soundtrack is from the caretaker who famously made Everywhere at the End of Time, a 6-hour album that depicts the slow and agonizing effects of diseases like dementia. In fact, most of, if not all of the music in this game is from Everywhere at the End of Time. The art style, visual effects, and music create this atmosphere that pushes forward the feeling that we're witnessing someone's fading memories of the past. The atmosphere really held my enjoyment throughout this game. Not to say the story isn't interesting, all 3 endings led to their respective satisfying conclusions, but the atmosphere is the big selling point for me. If you like the idea of liminal spaces, you'll more than likely love this game. If you don't, I'd still say check it out. The story has an interesting take on the fading essence of memory. For the next game, I wanted to find a Game Boy style horror game. While this concept isn't new, YouTuber Lumpy Touch brought this idea to popularity with series like Garfield Game Boy'd. That was my first exposure to it, and since then I've liked the aesthetic mix of body horror and the Game Boy art style. I wanted a game that encompassed this idea, and Cryohazard falls into that category perfectly. It was created in GB Studio, a Game Boy development software. This makes the game really feel like a Game Boy game both graphically and in gameplay. Cryohazard is a point-and-click choose-your-own-adventure game akin to something like Monkey Island or Grim Fandango. Our protagonist awakes from a cryo chamber with no recollection of how or why they were there. From here, we get to explore this seemingly abandoned laboratory that's been overrun by the experiments that were being tested in here. Cryohazard has a simple health and inventory system similar to other point-and-click games. You have a few inventory slots that hold items, and you have a set amount of health for combat encounters. Combat in this game is also very streamlined. When you enter combat, you just choose between fight and flee. No picking attacks, no strategy, just click fight and hope for the best. Unless you really mess up somehow, you'll win most encounters as the game focuses on the storytelling. This game has multiple endings, of which I got 2 of them, but there's plenty more to explore. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I like the concept of the story. A laboratory performing experiments on living creatures for some unknown purpose is interesting, and I'm probably going to go back to play the other endings as I kind of want to know what the full scope of this world is. Speaking of the experiments, I really like the designs of the enemies here. They're these fleshy and distorted abominations that look really good in the Game Boy art style. I think this pixel quality actually gives the monsters an edge. We can only really get certain features and shapes with this style. Things like color, texture, and the like are left to the imagination, and that amplifies the horror. A person's mind is going to be so much more unsettling than what someone else can create. A person can insert their own idea of what a monster is. An example is this creature. We get a general shape and some defining features, but a majority of the attributes are free for your mind to insert what it wants to. Some may see him as flesh with no skin, while I kind of see him as covered in this thick mix of blood and mucus. That's more unsettling to me personally. The ambiguity makes the horror more personal. I really enjoy Cryohazard. The body horror elements with the Game Boy aesthetic aesthetic wrapped up in a clean point-and-click adventure game with an interesting story and world makes this game a fun and creepy experience. The game is free and runs in your browser, so definitely go check this one out. One other cool point I want to mention is that the creator also has the game available to download in ROM files, so you could in theory load this onto a flash card and play it on an actual Game Boy. That's it. I just think it's cool that the creator gave us that accessibility, and I might actually put it onto a cart in the future. This next game is actually what inspired me to make this video in the first place. I don't remember exactly what led me to it, but I somehow stumbled across this game on Steam. Milk inside of a bag of milk inside of a bag of milk. I thought the name was funny, but after reading the description I realized that this game was not going to be funny in the slightest. Milk Inside of a Bag of Milk is a psychological horror visual novel that follows someone suffering from a variety of mental illnesses that make the smallest tasks near impossible. Your task is to help said protagonist go to the store and buy milk. After reading that, I realized that this game is going to be a lot darker and a lot sadder than the name implies, and boy was I right about that. The game is a visual novel, so there's really not much to say in the gameplay department. What sells this game so much for me is the presentation and the story. I can't talk about anything else in the game without spoiling anything, so if the brief description from before interests you, go check it out. It's in the games list linked below, as well as a link to its Steam page. It's only $1 and it takes about 15 minutes to beat, but trust me, it is 100% worth it. If you don't want spoilers, skip to the chapter ahead. For those of you still watching, let's get into the game's story. We follow a girl who fans have dubbed Milk-chan, prepping for a trip to the store to buy milk. We play as a sort of inner monologue for Milk-chan. She seems to have a lot of anxiety over everything, even simply leaving her house. She seems to cope with this by pretending she's a character in a visual novel. This meta plot point seems to alleviate a lot of her stress about the trip. We follow Milk-chan as she makes her way to the store, where she's greeted by this apparition who keeps just saying the letter O. This encounter drags on, with Milk-chan not understanding what this creature means. She explains to us that the letter O is one of her greatest fears because it's something she sees in her mind when she thinks about it. We then get shown this image before we move on to the milk aisle. Once there, Milk-chan breaks down the logistics of a bag of milk for a little bit too long before we remind her that she needs to get home. We have an encounter with another creature to buy the milk, and Milk-chan begins to head home. After some dialogue, Milk-chan decides to take a moment at the park to talk with us. Not us as the inner monologue, but us as the actual players of the game. This is where we get a majority of why Milk-chan acts the way she does and why the world seems as it does. Milk-chan explains that some time ago her father injured himself by throwing himself out of the second-story window, seemingly due to growing tension between himself and Milk-chan's mother. After witnessing her father, Milk-chan had a gap in her memory. All she knows is that she hasn't left the apartment she lives in for a long time, and it seems she developed some severe mental illnesses during that time. It's around here where it's pieced together that we aren't really her inner monologue, we're playing the medication for her mental illness. We have control over her inner voice since we're supposed to be helping fight back against her problems. This is further solidified as her inner voice takes control again. You can be kind and thoughtful towards Milk-chan throughout the entire game until this moment where the game forces you to berate her and threaten her to go home. Milk-chan obliges, and we meet her mother, who only asks her about the milk and her meds before sending her to bed. That's it. That's the plot of the game. The game ends after Milk-chan agrees to go to bed. It's a lot to take in, so let me create a timeline so it's a bit easier to understand. Milk-chan's family always had tension between her father, and her mother. This culminated with her father game-ended himself, and Milk-chan was traumatized after seeing his body. There's a long gap in her memory from there, but it's suggested that Milk-chan developed several severe mental illnesses like anxiety, OCD, and schizophrenia. During this period, Milk-chan never left the house and was seemingly abused by her mother, considering how Milk-chan views her mother at the end of the game. At some point, Milk-chan begins to take medication for her mental health. This is where we come into play as we help her go to the store to buy the milk. I haven't touched on it yet, but this entire game is in this pixelated style with everything being in different shades of red. This is done intentionally as this is literally Milk-chan's visual perspective. Her illness has her perceive the world in this blood red tone and normal people as these frightening monsters from the trauma of seeing her father dead. We see Milk-chan try to cope with the world around her, and we try to help her along the way. This game is labeled as a horror game, and while the game is unsettling in its presentation through the visuals and music, Milk Inside of a Bag of Milk serves more as a representation of how crippling mental illness can really be. While it is talked about and more accepted nowadays, people with severe mental illness still suffer with people being unable to understand why they say the things and act the way they do. Oftentimes, this lack of understanding can lead to cruel treatment, but this game offers what I think is a well-written window into the mind of someone living with things like severe anxiety, anxiety, schizophrenia, autism, or other neurodivergencies. I've shown this game to a few people that have been diagnosed with similar conditions, and they've all said that this game hit a little too close to home. It's a good representation of how their inner voice works and how they have been treated in the past by people who didn't understand their condition. The story is the most important part of the game for me, and the presentation really brings it home. I've talked about the visuals, everything is in this blood red pixelated style, and the designs of the monsters are great. Like Cryohazard, the pixelated style leaves your mind open to interpret the monsters in a way that makes it more personal. On top of the visuals, the music really fits. A lot of the tracks on here are really unsettling. The music consists of a lot of these distorted drones that change pitch frequently, and these dissonant pianos and percussion that amplify the game's unsettling nature. The music really makes the world we're witnessing feel alien and uncanny. Great presentation paired with an unsettling yet insightful plot. Milk Inside of a Bag of Milk is one of the best visual novels I've played and is a fantastic representation of mental illness. Big shout out to the game's creator, Nikita Kryukov. He's created one of the best experiences I've had in a long time. And that's it. Those are all the indie horror games I played for Halloween. I hope you enjoyed my reviews, and go check them out in the itch.io link in the description. I had a great time playing through some great games, and I recommend everyone go check out these titles. They're all cheap and you can play through them pretty quickly, but they're all 100% worth your time. There was one other game I wanted to include on this list, but after playing it, I realized that I had something special in my hands. This game is one of the best games I've ever played, and it deserves its own video.